Well, hello and welcome back to my intermediate conversation course. And in this video, we're doing sort of a makeup lecture for the holiday. So rather than pure conversation, I'm going to kind of talk about English pronunciation, particularly word stress or lexical stress. Lexical means word, having to do with words. So we're talking about stressed syllables in this video. I'm going to talk about principles of stress placement. You might call it accent. We call it usually stress in linguistics. That's the main syllable of a word that sounds louder, stronger. In English has this important rhythm of stressed or heavy syllables and light syllables. And that's really the key thing. The most important thing of this whole lecture is really the rhythm. That it's important to pronounce correct rhythm or stress because that's really key to making yourself understood. You will have an accent if you're learning English as a second language, and that's natural. But at least to get the stress placement in a way that's more accurate, that's consistent with how native speakers will say it, even though if your intonation and timing is a little off, that's okay. Or some of your pronunciation is a little off, that's okay. Sometimes placing the stress correctly, getting the rhythm right, may be more important than how you say the vowels and consonants for making yourself understood by native English speakers or others. And so, what is stress? How is it pronounced? It involves length. So when I say syllable, the first syllable of syllable is stressed. It sounds longer. Even though it's normally a short vowel, the I is a short vowel, but it sounds longer. Syllable. I'll exaggerate it for you. It's important to have the rhythm from length on stressed syllables and very short unstressed or light syllables. Syllable. You can exaggerate it for you, so maybe you can practice this by exaggerating the timing here. Syllable. Along with it, there's also intonation change or pitch change. My intonation is going to go up and down. It might just go up, might just go down, but usually it's up and down. A clear intonation change or rise, at least on stressed syllables. Syllable. So notice my intonation goes up and down some. And syllable. Along with length and intonation, there's also amplitude, which is a fancy word for loudness. It sounds louder. Now, it sounds louder partly or largely because of the intonation and the length. You're not really shouting, syllable! You're not shouting. It sounds louder. Or in part because of the length and the intonation. So syllable, it sounds louder. I'm not necessarily saying it really a lot louder if you measured in decibels, but it sounds louder than it even is. There's I might be saying the amp a little bit louder, but it sounds even louder than that because of the intonation and the length. We have primary stress. That is most, content words, nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, main verbs, that is, have a primary or main stress. Longer function words, like though, kind of have a main stress, although it's not as strong. Now, when you get into longer words, then these longer words, like 3 or more syllables, you can have kind of a second level or secondary stress, like amplitude. The amp is the main stress. The oo is a long vowel, so it gets a stress too, but a second level stress. Amplitude. And the I in the middle is a light or unstressed syllable, or syllable. The able. So in the word syllable, the first syllable is stressed, main stress, and the other 2 syllables are light. They're very short, light, softer, kind of flat intonation. Syllables. And that's what makes the rhythm of English, and this is the key thing. You don't probably have to worry so much right now about, where are the secondary stresses placed, and don't worry about that. That's more of a concern if you're studying linguistics. Just learning where at least the primary stress is and pronouncing that reasonably accurately so that it's clearly pronounced with a main stress there, like in sil, not able. Okay. So that people can understand you, and so that the rhythm sounds okay. It might be a little off because of a foreign accent. Don't worry about that. As long as people can identify where you're putting the main stress, so they can clearly understand the word that you're saying, and that's really, really important. There have been times where, say Koreans have just said everything with equal length and intonation, and it sounds weird. I didn't understand. We've had communication problems. So, for example, one time I was asking a Korean person, who will lead the meeting? Who will lead the meeting? And she said, Willie. I thought she was echoing back to me, will lead, and she was saying Willie, a guy's name, Willie. But she said both syllables with equal stress, Willie, which sounds like will lead, like she was echoing my question. So I said, who will lead the meeting? Okay. Willie, clear stress on the first syllable. Willie, Willie. It's important for making yourself understood. Accents are okay. Foreign accents are fine. If you speak English with a foreign accent, that's cool because you speak a second language and you speak a really hard one to learn, like English. So that's cool. Now let's look at some of the things that make English pronunciation and stress really hard. A lot of people say, well, English pronunciation is really hard. Like, where do we put the stresses? Well, reasons. Look at some of the things that make this crazy. Well, these vowel alternations, nation, a long vowel, becomes national when you add a suffix. The stress stays in the same syllable, nay, nah. But the vowel changes, nation, national. That's weird. What's up with that? This is an old pattern we got from Latin. And you don't need to worry about all the history of this, but this is a Latin pattern. Discrete becomes discretion when you add some endings, some suffixes, and make a new word. Collide, collision, produce, production, assume, assumption. Crazy, isn't it? Cave, cavity, exclaim, exclamatory, grade, gradual, nature, natural. And sometimes stress can move over when you add suffixes and make new words. Code, codify, compose, composition. So there on composition, the stress shifts over from compose to composition. Composition. Microscope, microscopic. Stress shift, microscopic. So we have these vowel alternations and these shifts. Here's a stress shift pattern you're familiar with. This occurs in a few words and sometimes common words from in English. Subject, like a thing that you study, and subject. I was subjected to this awful treatment. A verb, to subject something. Object, a thing. To object, like I object to this object. I don't like this object. I object to this object. Content, contents, like the contents of the book. Content, happy. I'm content with these contents. Crazy, huh? And some more example of shifts, like a nation, national, nationality. Main stress moves over to ow. Pronunciation. The ow becomes a with the secondary stress, and the a before in Asian becomes the main stress as you add that Asian. Weird, huh? Yeah, not too many languages are weird like this, like English. So all this complexity is really important. So when we talk about stress and intonation, an important term for talking about this is prosody. Prosody. So prosody is kind of like the rhythm of a language. It includes stress, intonation, other things that kind of create the rhythm. So you got vowels and consonants, and yeah, that's kind of important, but even more important many times is your prosody, your rhythm, because sometimes words might become unclear because of the rhythm, the stress, and intonation. So prosody, prosodic systems. We're talking about prosodic systems. So I'll talk about that mainly in this video, And I don't really have time to go into the mismatch between the spelling, writing system, or orthography and the pronunciation. But it's for some of the similar historical reasons that I will talk about in a minute. And got all these stress shifts and alternations. And it's really crazy. English is just really crazy. It's a very stressful language, right? Okay. Some more complex patterns. Let me show you how it's, especially for you as learners, it seems really inconsistent, right? Because you've got regret, stress on the last syllable, right? But egret, a bird. It's a bird. Egret. They're not consistent. But then baguette. You buy a baguette. It's a bakery. This seems inconsistent. Telephone. The phone has secondary stress, but phonology. Okay. Inertia, like you're in a car and you hit the brakes, but your body kind of keeps moving forward a bit. That's inertia. But the next word is not Pangea, it's Pangea. An old supercontinent that existed hundreds of millions of years ago, Pangea. Anyways, why is that? Then kilometer and kilometer, both pronunciations are okay in English. When I was young, and these international measurements were less common, less familiar, people said, in American English, we said kilometer. The scientists would say kilometer. As the word has become more common in American English, we now say kilometer, and that's the more common pronunciation today, kilometer. Kilometer is okay. It's an older pronunciation. You might still hear it. It's okay. People will understand you. If you say kilometer, because it's like kilogram and so on, kilobyte, but kilometer, why is that? All right, so the reasons for all this complexity in the pronunciation and also the spelling have to do with the history of the language. A brief history lesson here. Let's talk about the main stages in the history of the English language. We start with the Anglo-Saxon period, Anglo-Saxon language, or Old English as it's called. And it goes from about 400 to about, before the time of Chaucer, to about, I guess, the 12th century, 13th centuries. So by the time you start reading Geoffrey Chaucer's poetry, that's Middle English, and the language changed a lot, I'll show you. And then by the time you get to Shakespeare, that's actually modern English, but it's kind of, we could divide this into early modern English, like the time of Shakespeare and King James, and then contemporary English, which is what I'm speaking. I'm not speaking to you in Shakespearean English. So early modern English and then kind of later or contemporary modern English. Well, Anglo-Saxon. Let me pronounce some Anglo-Saxon for you. You may have heard of the famous poem Beowulf. It's from about the 9th century. Hwa wigerdenen gerdagum, theud kuninge frunge frunan, who the adelinges ellen fremedon, of schuld schefing scherdenach ratum, monigum megdum, mea dosila ofteach exode erlas, Susan eres wereth Fiaschaft funden geeth as frofe gewaad, werks en roknum werth mundem thach, o that him a goed kthare sittendra over granade guran skolde maybe gomban guldan. That was good kuning. Isn't that just beautiful? So moving, so touching, isn't it? This is the opening of Beowulf. Does that sound like English? You're probably saying no. When I ask my students, I usually say, "Oh, it sounds like German," because it is. It is old. It's Old German. It's very close to Old German. So, how did English get started? Well, it goes back to about 400, year 400. The Romans had occupied England for about 4.5 centuries, but the Roman Empire was in decline, and they were being attacked by different groups over on the east and the north sides. So they pulled their armies out of England in order to fight other attackers. So England is open, and so these various Germanic tribes spoke basically dialects related of Old German or related to Old German. So Germanic is related to Old German. The Germanic language family includes German, Dutch, English, Swedish, Danish, etc. So there were these old Germanic tribes in northern Germany and Denmark, particularly the Angles and the Saxons, and also the Utes and some others. They take advantage of this opportunity and they settled, conquered England, and pretty quickly their language became a separate language. Their old Germanic dialects became Old English or Anglo-Saxon, which is what I just read to you. That's Anglo-Saxon. And that's what the language sounded like for hundreds of years until the next big thing in the history of English, and you may know this, the Norman conquest in 1066. Some peoples in the north coast of France called the Normans, like Normandy, conquered England. The older king of England had died. There's sort of this power opening or power vacuum, and so the Normans took advantage of this and decided to invade England, and leading to a number of battles. Finally, the last battle being the Battle of Hastings on 14 October 1066. Well, the anniversary of that is coming up. We should celebrate. We should have like a Battle of Hastings Day. We should celebrate this because this is an important event in the history of the English language. 1066. So the Normans spoke a form of Old French, which was at the time still pretty close to late Latin. And so because of this, into English come a lot of Old French and Latin words. And so you had two languages, the upper class speaking Norman, Old French, Latin-based language. The lower class is speaking Anglo-Saxon, and over the next couple of centuries, the two languages basically blended together. Less than 2 centuries, probably. So by the time you get to Geoffrey Chaucer, it has become Middle English. The two languages have blended together, and you get Middle English. So we have Anglo-Saxon words, kind of like the most kind of core, basic, common vocabulary of English, including your most common everyday vocabulary, is Anglo-Saxon. So things like be, is, has, 1, 2, 3, swim, swam, swum, teach, taught. A lot of common everyday words are Anglo-Saxon, but then a number of other fairly common words come in from French and Latin roots from the Normans, table and chair and things like that. So a lot of our other everyday words are also Old French, as well as some Latin terms that are maybe no words you use all the time, like subject and object. Those are Latin words too that came into English. So the two languages blended together became Middle English. Now over the time, between the time of Chaucer and Shakespeare, a lot of other changes happened in English. Sound changes happened, grammar changes happened, which I don't have time to get into. It's really complicated. But there were big changes in how vowels were pronounced. And that's another reason for the complexity in the spelling, where, for example, what was the vowels of English, today we say A, E, I, O, U. It used to be A, E, I, O, U. And in every other language that uses a Latin alphabet, that first letter is not A, but it's A, A. And it was A in English. But big changes happened in the vowel system. It's really complicated. A became A, the E became E, the E became I. It's really weird. It's really crazy. It's called the Great Vowel Shift, which I don't have time to go into. Then, by the time of Shakespeare, it's become kind of what we call modern English, early modern English. And along this time, some other big things happen. You've heard of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Well, what's happening here? Well, number one, people are again studying classic, ancient and Greek, Latin and Greek literature and learning, scholarship. And they're also interested in new learning and new scholarship. New discoveries are being made. The birth of modern science happens here. Modern science, modern physics and chemistry start at this time. New discoveries, new ideas, new inventions being made and everything. Math, philosophy, engineering, biology, medicine. So for all of these new ideas, discoveries, and inventions, we need new words. Well, as scholars were doing Latin and Greek again on a big scale. They started drawing from Latin and Greek to create new words for these new ideas and concepts and discoveries and inventions, especially Latin. This is true for English, but for also a lot of other languages throughout in Europe. Other European languages have a lot of these Latin words and also Greek words. And this is still going on today. We're still creating new words from Latin and Greek elements in science and engineering, for example. So Latin and Greek word elements have been coming into English ever since then. Along with this, influence from modern French and Spanish. So in the 1700s to the 1900s, French was a major world language, and a lot of loanwords came into English from modern French. Nowadays, a lot of words are coming into English from Spanish language. That's not so hard. The Spanish words kind of follow a Latin pattern when it comes to prosody, so they're not hard to say. So we've got these prosodic patterns in English, what I call prosodic families. You've got a lot of really common words that follow an Anglo-Saxon pattern. Then especially longer words, usually especially more academic and professional and technical words from Latin that follow a Latin pattern. And occasionally you've got a Greek pattern, and occasionally you got French patterns in English. But the biggest ones are Anglo-Saxon and Latin. Again, probably the core vocabulary, most of the more common words in English will follow an Anglo-Saxon pattern of prosody, and in some, especially academic words, often follow a Latin pattern. So let's look at these. Now, in order to talk about where the stress is located, I'm going to use this kind of system. This is my own system. When the stress is on the final syllable of a word, like in baguette, I'll call that syllable -1. It's just a convenient way to refer to the syllables, which syllable position it is. -1 stress, like in baguette. You could have stress on the second from the end, like pizza and banana. You could have stress on the third syllable from the end, -3 stress, like hamburger, barbecue. I think I was hungry when I made these examples, sorry. Now occasionally, not too often, occasionally you get -4 stress on the fourth syllable from the end. Controversy, pumpernickel. Pumpernickel is a kind of rye bread, which you may not like, but I like it. It's fun. Then there are neutral endings which don't affect the stress. I'll just call them 0 syllables because they don't affect the stress at all. You can pile on neutral endings if you can. They don't do anything to the stress. The ing, like demolishing, past tense, ed, like demoted, plural, like boxes, the er for noun, some of these suffixes, like for nouns, er, like manager, the li, like orderly, the uri, like bakery, the ism, like nationalism, the iese, or in British English, or ize in American English, like vandalize. We don't worry about those. We're not going to worry about those. They don't affect stress. So let's look at the common Anglo-Saxon pattern, and this is going to be maybe typical for a lot of two-syllable words. When you have a two-syllable word and you want to guess where the stress is, especially if it's a fairly common or familiar word or a two-syllable word, it might follow the Anglo-Saxon prosodic pattern, where you have -1 stress on the final syllable for verbs and adjectives, like to subject, to object. I object to this. I'm content with this. Engulf, engross, desert, repay, alone, allow, -1 stress. For verbs and adjectives, nouns tend to have -2 stress. Subject, object, content, knowledge, witness, uptake, upstart. Okay, it seems straightforward. This will tend to work with maybe at least 50 to 60% of two-syllable words in English, maybe more. I need to do more research on this, and like do some statistics on this for you someday. Now there are a couple of weird things here. Okay, witness. Let's look at witness first. That's a noun, but it can be used as a verb. And that's common in English, and this makes it even harder. Nouns could get used as verbs, and sometimes verbs can also get used as nouns. So I guess, again, I need to do more research on this, so maybe we should say, well, if it can be used commonly as a noun. Maybe it was originally a noun and it's maybe going to be -2 stress. Because otherwise you don't want to go to like a dictionary and look up the history of the word. When did witness first become used? Was it mainly a noun or verb first in the history of English? Obviously you can't do that. It's not something you would do unless you're doing linguistics research on Old English. So maybe I'll just say if it can be commonly used as a noun, it may tend to have -2 stress, because maybe it was a noun. More likely it was a noun first and then got used as a verb later. Now let's look at subject, object, content, or you can say subject, object, and content, whatever. These are not Anglo-Saxon words. They're from Latin, but they are following the Anglo-Saxon stress patterns. Why? This is weird. Okay, this is really weird. There are apparently some Latin words like this. They are considered common enough. They feel like kind of more familiar words. So it's like they've been adopted from the Latin family into the Anglo-Saxon family. So we're not talking about just Anglo-Saxon words, but we're talking about an Anglo-Saxon prosodic pattern and words that just fall in this family of more familiar words. They've been sort of anglicized or brought into the Anglo-Saxon family of word pronunciation, sort of a prosodic lexical family. That's the best explanation I have for this. I need to do more research, but that seems to be what's going on. That's my hypothesis. So more familiar words, even if they're from Latin, they might follow the Anglo-Saxon pattern of -1 or -2 stress. Yeah, English is weird, isn't it? Okay, now here's there's some more Latin stress patterns. These are kind of more reliable. These usually work. You don't have to kind of scratch your head. So there are different Latin stress patterns, and this is the first. Here's one. You tend to have -2. Well, usually you have -2 stress if the word ends in certain suffixes, IC, ICS, or in scientific words, the osis and such. So -2 stress on graphic and graphics, comics, democratic, words ending in IC or ICS, as well as words like neurosis, neurotic. Those are science terms. Then you have -3 stress if you have the endings Y and AL. Again, this is in more academic, especially in more academic vocabulary. Not so much the Y as in healthy, but the Y in academic terms. Democracy, so democracy, -3 stress. Oddity, community, photography, and AL words, critical, logical. So generally you have -3 stress on words with these endings. And this is a pretty reliable rule or pattern. It usually works. There's another Latin stress pattern, this kind of -2 pattern with I stem suffixes or endings. So for example, words in ION that can include TION like nation, SION like vision. The stress is almost always on the syllable before that suffix. So these are I stem suffixes that begin with I, like nation, vision, degradation, implication, incision. Before the ION ending, the stress is on the syllable before it. This works in over 99% of the time. I actually have only found one exception to this, which I will mention later. This also works for other I stems. The IA in media, IUM, IA, bacterium, bacteria. It's on the syllable before the I stem suffix. IOR, exterior, behavior. IAN, IAL, meridian, musician, radial, spatial. IOUS, like egregious, prestigious. IANT, IENT, and related suffixes IANCE, IENCY, etc., etc. Radiant, luminescent. Radiance, luminescence. Sufficient, sufficience. Deviancy, sufficiency, and so on. The stress is always on the syllable before the suffix. These I stem suffixes. This works practically all the time. This is a pretty reliable pattern you can depend on. I've only found one word that doesn't fit. Now, for other words, so these are mainly academic words, technical words, more professional level vocabulary. So if you see a new word, and if it's more of an academic, professional, technical word, and if it doesn't fit like the ICAAL pattern or this ISTEM -2 ISTEM pattern, if it doesn't have those endings, other words that have like, especially if they have like 2 or more syllables, the general pattern in these words, which are often from Latin, sometimes they are from Greek, but came from Greek through Latin into English, they often follow the -2, -3 pattern, which is this. It can be on the -2 syllable, particularly if that -2 is a long vowel or a heavier syllable. Let me explain that in a minute. So words like dipole, polar, vandal, typist, encumber, visage, -2 stress. Not always, but especially if it's a long vowel. Otherwise, you're going to have stress on the -3, monopoly, precipitate, prejudice, predicate, surrogate, appropriate, -2 or -3. Now, I can't tell you, I can't give you any clear rules for when it's going to be -2 or -3. But when you see new words, especially academic, technical, professional words, it's probably going to be -2 or -3 because it's probably a word from Latin. It will tend to be -2 if the syllable is heavier. So there's something called syllable weight. If the -2 syllable has a long vowel, and or if it's got a final or coda consonant. So the di and dipole, long vowel, polar, vandal, short vowel, but it's got an n. It's got an n. That syllable has a coda consonant. N, vandal, encumber, short vowel, but with a final consonant in that syllable. Otherwise, if the -2 syllable is not heavy, the stress will tend to go to the -3. But I can't give you any clear rules because it's super complicated. Sometimes it depends on, okay, what kind of coda consonant, what kind of final consonant is it in the -2? Is the -2 heavier than -3, or is -3 heavier than -2? It can depend on all kinds of complexities with different prefixes and suffixes, and they don't behave the same way. Linguists have tried to understand this, they've tried to analyze this, and there are just no clear rules. I was thinking doing my PhD research on this when I was in graduate school, and after a while I said, no, there's no way I can do this. Or maybe actually for a master's thesis, I was thinking of doing this, and I said, no, this is insanely complicated. I can't figure out. Some of the best linguists who've tried, they can't come up with like really clear patterns or descriptions of, okay, when is it -2, when is it -3? Not just for these Latin words, but for others. It's super complicated. So I can only give you a general kind of rule of thumb, or we say a general pattern, a general principle that doesn't always work. It will tend to, if it's like an academic, professional word, technical word, a word you don't know, it will tend to be -2, especially if it's got a long vowel or heavier syllable. Otherwise, it will tend to be -3 stress. But it's hard, and you can try to pronounce it and see which sounds better. Monopoly sounds better. Okay, you can't really tell sometimes if it's a long vowel. You may not, unless you have thought about it. It's probably hard for you to kind of decide, okay, where do I cut the syllable? Does this sound along with this syllable or that syllable? All those kinds of things. If you're not a linguist, you're not going to be able to know. So I'm not going to even try to give you any more details about this. This is awful. Those are some general tendencies or patterns with new academic words that you might see, which are probably from Latin. Now there's some, with a few words from modern French, you can have a French stress pattern, which is stress on the last syllable, -1. Lemonade, résumé, fiancé, garage, park your car in a garage. However, some speakers have found that, oh, these words are familiar enough to me that I'm going to pronounce it with the Latin pattern. They've been Latinized. So instead of lemonade, a lot of people in English today say lemonade. Resume, your job application document is a resume. Fiancé, that's the words. Garage, that works in American English, but a lot of British people say garage. I parked my car in the garage, which to me sounds funny, but okay, that's how they talk there. Employee or employee. But baguette, okay, baguette, towelette, maybe somewhat less common words, they still follow the French stress pattern. If it's a familiar word, it might have been Latinized, brought into the Latin family. Greek prefixes, so number one, you've got stress on special prefixes like television. So this is one exception to the I-stem, Latin I-stem rule, where you put this main stress before an I-stem suffix. This is one exception that I found, television, because the Greek stress on tele, I guess, outweighs the Latin stress, at least in this one case, television. So certain, usually technical, scientific prefixes may take the main stress. Television, gigabyte, megabyte, kilogram, kilometer, but also kilometer. So kilometer, which is a Greek pattern, kilometer, the word became familiar enough that we Latinized it to kilometer. Yeah, crazy, I know. And then there are also a lot of technical words, really technical words, that follow a Greek -3 or -4 stress pattern. I'm not going to talk about it here. You're not going to see these words. These are like really long technical words, which you will see if you study medicine, biology, math, physics, or whatever. So I'm not going to talk about them. They're very technical words you're not going to, probably won't see unless you go into a more technical field, like in science fields. There are also compound stress patterns with compound words where you, and I think this is maybe an old Anglo-Saxon pattern, I'm not sure, because modern German does the same thing, I think. With two nouns in a compound, whether they're written together or spelled as separate words, doesn't matter. Main stress, primary stress on the first noun, the other nouns get secondary stress. So keyboard, coffee shop, hard drive. That also includes compounds made with an adjective like the White House, blue house, greenhouse, and so on. Okay, this might sound confusing, and it is. It's really confusing for linguists who try to study this, and I can imagine it would drive them to drink. Basically, you've got these prosodic families in English. There's a set of words that follow an Anglo-Saxon prosodic pattern, especially more familiar words and especially two-syllable words. Even if they are not from Anglo-Saxon English, they will tend to follow the Anglo-Saxon pattern. Longer words and academic words will tend to follow the Latin prosodic system, they'll be in the Latin family, -2 or -3 stress usually, or I-stem suffix on the -1. And occasionally see Greek and French stress systems. If the stuff I've been talking about today really interests you and you find that exciting, you can go to my website, like this web page here, and see a few more examples in a bit more detail. The main thing, though, is that English has this important rhythm that comes from an alternation of stressed and unstressed syllables. Think about music. You have a beat, da, 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 da. There's an alternation between strong and weak, da, 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 da. That's rhythm. English has rhythm. It's important to pronounce this rhythm well enough that people can understand you. Give you an example. If you listen to a poem, this is my favorite poem in English, Poe's The Raven. There's an alternation, a rhythm of stressed and light syllables, and it's really important. Now, once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, "tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more." That was a beautiful poem. Read the whole thing. You can go to YouTube and find renditions by professional voice actors who are, of course, far better than me. Like James Earl Jones does a really good reading of this. You can find him on YouTube. Some other famous voice actors are also on YouTube reciting this poem. The Latin system maybe is the most important one if you're dealing with new words, especially in an academic context, new academic, professional, and technical words. The Latin patterns, the Latin system is maybe one to practice with as you're trying to figure out how to pronounce new words. But these are kind of like general rules of thumb. They're not really hard rules, but these are general patterns. Maybe it will help you to kind of decode new words. Otherwise, to improve your pronunciation, some things you should do. Read a lot. Just read a lot. Get these words into your brain so your brain becomes more familiar with the pronunciation. Reading is important for developing your working memory, including the linguistic parts of your working memory for words and also for sounds. There are different parts of your working memory, and there's one part for words that you're reading, and there's another part for sounds. Like when you read something, you hear the words in your head, right? That's your phonological working memory work, and that can be trained to be a lot more efficient. Your phonological and lexical working memory, you can train it by reading a lot, especially in a second language. Shadowing and repeating, that's when you kind of repeat after a speaker. Like you can find good speakers on YouTube you like, and maybe for a little while, just try repeating after them. Immediately after they say something, you repeat what they say. Now, you can't do that for too long. It gets boring after a while, but sometimes you can practice that. Or you can kind of practice and imagine you're speaking like that, your favorite TED Talk speaker or something. Practice reading poems and songs. You can find song lyrics online easily for your favorite songs. So practice reading song lyrics, reading poems, and singing your favorite songs. Practice singing your songs with just the lyrics in front of you or while you're listening to the song, both lyrics and the music. Practice singing along because music and poetry have that rhythm, and especially in music, you can learn the rhythm. You can clearly hear the rhythm of stressed and light syllables. So it's important to practice if you want to improve your English pronunciation. So those are some general tips, some general patterns. So these are patterns. You shouldn't view these as rules. These are patterns. And words tend to fall in one or another pattern, and one or another prosodic pattern or group. So maybe this will help you to either practice your pronunciation and learning new words, and also just to understand why English pronunciation seems so crazy, so complicated. This is why. It's a complex history. It's a complex kind of grouping of different prosodic families all under one language. And it's really crazy. But that's why it's so complicated. So you can understand why it's so complicated. Maybe understanding that will maybe make it seem less frustrating and hopefully less stressful to you as you learn word stress. Okay, so well, good luck with that, and I'll see you in the next lecture. See some of you next week in Zoom. So good luck with your pronunciation, word learning. Good luck on your homework. Enjoy your holiday, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.